whatever. Now, going all the way back to the first part of your question, it is technically it is VO2 stands for the V is volume of oxygen, O2. It is how much air or oxygen you can bring in and utilize. And it has two major components. One is what we call central, one is peripheral. And what I mean by that is VO2 max is calculated as your cardiac output, which is we call Q, multiplied by your AVO2 difference. And so cardiac output is specifically how much blood can be pumped out of your heart per pump. That's called your stroke volume, multiplied by how many beats your heart beats per minute, your heart rate, right? So what's the heart rate? How often is it pumping? Multiplied by how much blood is pumping out per pump. And that tells you your cardiac output, okay? And again, that's the output of blood. Think of it that way. That's the central version. Now, the peripheral version is then when that blood is pumping through your body, ideally, your muscles that are exercising are able to get that blood into them. And then specifically, they can take the oxygen out of the blood and get it into the muscle tissue. And they can take the waste products like carbon dioxide and other things like that and take them from muscle and put it into blood. So that when your blood comes into muscle, it's oxygenated. And when it comes in full of glucose and things like that. And then when it leaves muscle, it is deoxygenated and full of waste products and carbon dioxide. That then goes back to your heart, goes back to your lungs. You breathe out the CO2. You take another breath in, that O2 comes back in, and we repeat that cycle, right? So you're breathing in oxygen, you're breathing out CO2, and you're cycling there. So the second half of our equation, remember we had our cardiac output, our Q, multiplied by what's called AVO2 difference. So AVO2 difference is the difference in the amount of oxygen in the arterial side minus the venous side. That's a fancy way of saying how much oxygen went into your tissue and then how much was in the blood after it left your tissue. That's the arterial side versus the venous side. And so the better you are at extracting oxygen into your tissue, the higher that number becomes. And since it's a multiplier, a high AVO2 multiplied by a cardiac output, both those numbers go up, then the VO2 max goes up. And so that was technically what that functionally means, and I can translate that all. How well can you bring in oxygen? How much of that blood can you pump through your system? And how effective are you at getting the oxygen out of your blood into your working muscle? That tells us exactly the volume of oxygen you can utilize. And we typically express that number in units of milliliters. That's milliliters of oxygen, so measurement, per kilogram of body weight per minute. So when you see like a kind of heuristic we use a lot is 50 at 50, which means you should strive for a VO2 max of 50 milliliters, so 50 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute, right? That's VO2 max of 50 at age 50. So that's kind of a number we want to get to. It's pretty high, but that would be for men. For women, it's probably 45 at 50 would be great. So VO2 max 45 at 50 would be a solid number to go after. And that scales with age and stuff like that. But that's really what VO2 max honestly truly is.
And it can sound a little technical, and I appreciate the technical explanation, but just to make sure people really understand, and this point drives home, is that any activity that you're going to be doing as you age, especially as you get into your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond, hopefully, knock on wood, that we all make it there, our capacity to take in oxygen, turn it into energy, is a key factor into that. What are some examples of some things? Let's take for your average 70-year-old, which is not even really that old, right? Like, what are some things and activities that you can share that commonly are things that people struggle with that is a good indication that, hey, actually their VO2 max is not good, and that's why they can't do this normal everyday activity? Can you think of any?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a ton. The way to think about